The notification came at 6:47 inches the morning. I remember the exact time because I was still in my car in the hospital parking garage, engine running, trying to find the motivation to go in for a 12-hour shift. My phone lit up on the passenger seat. I almost didn't look at it. It was an alert from my bank, not the kind you ignore. Mortgage application submitted against property at 412 Dunmore Road, Clarksville, Tennessee. If you did not initiate this action, please contact your branch immediately. I sat there for a full 30 seconds reading that sentence over and over. I had no mortgage on that house. I had never applied for one. That house had been paid off in full the day my grandmother left it to me 3 years ago, right there in her will, signed and notarized at Hargrove & Associates on a Tuesday afternoon in September. I had the paperwork in a fireproof box under my bed. I knew exactly what I owned, and I knew exactly who would do something like this. I called my brother before I even called the bank. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail, which told me everything. My brother always answers on the first ring when he needs something. When he's done something wrong, he doesn't pick up at all. I called the bank next. The woman who answered was polite and careful in that specific way people are when they already know the situation is bad. She told me an application had been submitted the previous afternoon by someone claiming to be the primary title holder of 412 Dunmore Road. The name on the application was mine. The signature was mine. The copy of the deed attached to the application listed me as owner, but there was a second name added that had never been there before. My brother's name. I asked her to freeze everything. She said she already had, that the application had flagged their fraud detection system because the deed on file with the county recorder's office didn't match the one submitted with the application. She told me to go to the county recorder's office as soon as it opened and to bring every piece of documentation I had. I called out of my shift. I drove home, pulled the fireproof box from under my bed, photographed every single document inside it before I even touched the originals, and sent those photos to my personal email, my attorney's email, and my cloud storage. My grandmother had told me once, when I was maybe 12 years old, that the only thing that protects you in this world is documentation. She had grown up with nothing and built herself a life out of paper trails and careful record keeping. I had inherited her instincts along with her house. I was at the county recorder's office when the doors opened at 8. The woman behind the counter had the kind of face that doesn't show much, the kind you develop after years of watching people walk through your door in various states of crisis. She typed in the address slowly, read something on her screen, and then stopped. She looked up at me. She looked back at the screen. She typed something else. She said, "Can I see your ID, please?" I gave it to her. She compared it to whatever she was reading, then turned her monitor slightly toward me so I could see the screen. There were 2 deed records on file for 412 Dunmore Road. The original, recorded 3 years ago when my grandmother's estate was settled, listing me as sole owner. And a second one, recorded 4 days ago, listing both my name and my brother's name as joint tenants with right of survivorship. I hadn't signed that document. I hadn't been present when it was filed. I had never agreed to add my brother to anything. I asked her how that was possible. She said, "Someone came in with what appeared to be a valid notarized deed and a valid ID. We record what's presented to us." She paused. "But I'm looking at this now, and there are some discrepancies I need to flag. The notary stamp on this filing doesn't match our registered notary database, and the deed number sequence doesn't align with our records from your grandmother's estate." She picked up her phone and called someone. She spoke quietly, turned away from me. When she turned back, she said, "I'm putting a hold on both records, pending investigation. You need to file a complaint with our office today, and then you need to go to the sheriff's department. Do you have an attorney?" I called my attorney from the parking lot. Her name is Sandra, and she has been my attorney since I bought my first car at 23, and the dealership tried to switch the loan terms on me the day I came to sign. She answered before the second ring. When I finished telling her everything, there was a brief silence on her end. Not a surprised silence, more like the silence of someone doing rapid calculations. She said, "Don't go back to that house alone. Don't confront your brother by phone or in person until we've filed the criminal complaint. Screenshot every communication you have from him. Every text, every voicemail. Don't delete anything." She paused, "And I need you to understand something. What you're describing isn't a family dispute. This is deed fraud. This is identity theft. This is a felony." I knew that. I had known it since I was sitting in that parking garage at 6:47 inches the morning. What I didn't know yet was that my brother had already been to the house. I found out when I drove past it on my way to the sheriff's department. I hadn't planned to stop. Sandra had told me not to go alone. But I slowed down when I passed the driveway because something looked different, and when I looked closer, I understood what it was. There was a padlock on the gate that I had never put there. There were lights on inside. My brother's truck was parked in the side yard like it belonged there, like it had always been there, like the house had always been his, and I was the one who was trespassing. I kept driving. My hands were completely steady, which surprised me. I didn't feel steady, but something had settled in my chest that was colder and quieter than anger, something that felt more like clarity. He had counted on me to panic. He had counted on the bank alert coming too late, on the county records being processed before I noticed, on the mortgage being approved, and the money being in his account before I put it together. He had miscalculated every single step. At the sheriff's department, I was assigned to a deputy named Callahan. He was somewhere in his mid-40s, unhurried in the way people are when they've seen enough that nothing surprises them anymore. I laid out everything on his desk. The bank notification, the photos of my original deed, the recorder's office visit, Sandra's name and number, the photo I had taken from my car of my brother's truck in my driveway. He went through everything methodically, taking notes. When I finished, he said, "The fraudulent deed recording is enough to open a criminal investigation on its own. The mortgage application attempt makes it significantly more serious, because now we're talking about bank fraud at the federal level as well." He looked at the photo of the truck. "Is there anything in that house you're concerned about? Documents? Valuables?" I thought about the second fireproof box, the one with my grandmother's original will, her jewelry, the first editions she had collected over 60 years, and the letters she had written to my grandfather that I had never been able to bring myself to read. I had never told my brother about that box, but my brother had grown up in the same house I had, and he knew how our grandmother thought, and if he had gone looking, he would have found it. I told Deputy Callahan yes. He said he could accompany me to the property to document the situation and to ensure that my brother vacated, since the property legally remained in my name pending the recorder's investigation. He made 2 phone calls first, one to his supervisor, explaining the situation, one to the county recorder's office to confirm the hold on the deed records. He was thorough and he was careful, and he did not for one moment treat this like a family squabble that I should handle privately. We drove separately. I followed his cruiser down Route 9, past the grain elevator and the Methodist church and the gas station where my grandmother used to buy lottery tickets every Friday even though she never won. And when we turned onto Dunmore Road, I felt something in my throat that I swallowed back down. My brother came out of the house before we even reached the gate. He had always had good instincts about when to get ahead of a situation. He was smiling, which meant he thought he still had some version of control over this. He was wearing a flannel shirt I recognized as one of my grandfather's. That detail hit me somewhere specific. He looked at Deputy Callahan and then at me, and the smile adjusted slightly but didn't disappear. He said, "There's no reason for all this. This is a family matter." Deputy Callahan said, "Sir, can you state your name and your relationship to the property at this address?" My brother said his name. He said he was co-owner, that his name was on the deed, that he had as much right to be there as I did. Deputy Callahan said, "The deed you're referring to is currently under a fraud hold with the county recorder's office. The original deed on file lists your sister as sole owner. Until that investigation is resolved, you're on property that doesn't belong to you." My brother's smile stopped working. He looked at me and he said, "You're really doing this?" I said, "You started it." He said, "Grandma would have wanted both of us to have this house. You know that. You've always known that. And here's the thing about that. Here's the thing I had been sitting with for 3 years. Since the afternoon Sandra read the will aloud in a conference room, and my brother's face went through about 6 different emotions in 4 seconds. My grandmother had loved both of us. That was not in question. But my grandmother had also watched my brother borrow money from everyone in our family for 30 years, without paying any of it back. She had watched him lose his first house to foreclosure. She had watched him and his wife burn through every financial resource that came their way, and then look around for more. She had loved him completely and trusted him with nothing, and she had made that decision with full clarity and put it in writing with 2 witnesses present. He knew that. He had always known that. I said, "She left you the car and the contents of her checking account. She left me the house. It's in the will, which you were present for." He said, "The will can be contested." I said, "You already tried that. 18 months ago. Sandra dealt with it." His jaw tightened. He said, "You have more than you need. I have nothing." Deputy Callahan said, "Sir, I need you to step off the property now. You can come with me to the department to make a statement, or you can leave the property voluntarily. What I can't allow is for you to remain here." My brother looked at him for a long moment. I watched him calculate. I had watched him do this calculation my entire life. The one where he weighed how much he could push before it stopped being worth it. He had never in his life pushed all the way to the end of the line, because there had always been someone willing to give him an exit before he got there. Our mother, our aunt, me, more times than I could count. He looked at me and he said, "You're going to regret this." I said, "No, I really don't think I am." He left. Deputy Callahan documented everything, photographed the padlock, noted the truck's departure, walked through the interior of the house with me while I checked every room. The second fireproof box was exactly where I had left it, in the back of the hall closet behind a stack of blankets. My grandmother's jewelry was inside. The letters were inside. All of it was exactly as it should be. It took 3 weeks for the investigation to come together fully, and Sandra kept me updated at every stage in a way that made the process feel less like waiting and more like watching pieces fall into place. The fraudulent deed had been prepared using a template my brother had downloaded, a notary stamp he had purchased online from a company that sells them without verification, and a signature that was close enough to mine to pass a quick glance, but failed forensic examination. The deed had been filed by his wife, who had gone into the recorder's office on a Wednesday afternoon and presented it to a clerk who processed it without flagging the discrepancies. That clerk was placed on administrative review. The recorder's office updated their verification procedures. The mortgage application had been submitted online using my personal information, which my brother had access to because 4 years ago I had asked him to help me gather documents for a refinance I ultimately didn't pursue. I had trusted him with my social security number and bank account information and never thought to change anything afterward because he was my brother. Sandra filed the civil complaint first, then coordinated with the county DA's office. The criminal complaint covered deed fraud, identity theft, forgery of a notary seal, and attempted bank fraud. His wife was named as a co-defendant in the deed filing. On a Thursday afternoon, 6 weeks after the bank notification woke me up at 6:47 inches the morning, my brother and his wife were arrested at their apartment. I didn't watch it happen. I didn't need to. Sandra called me when it was done, and I was sitting in my car in the hospital parking garage, same as I had been 6 weeks before, and I said, "Thank you," and sat there for a while after I hung up. The preliminary hearing was 2 months later. I went. My brother looked smaller than I remembered, which sounds like something people say, but it was actually true in a physical way, like something had left him. His attorney argued that the action had been motivated by genuine belief in a shared inheritance claim that he had been acting on what he understood to be his grandmother's wishes. The judge was not interested in that argument. The property fraud charges alone carried a potential sentence of 2 to 10 years in Tennessee. The federal bank fraud referral added additional exposure. His attorney negotiated. The final agreement included 3 years of supervised probation, full restitution for all legal fees. Sandra had billed to me, mandatory financial counseling, and a permanent restraining order, keeping him off the Dunmore Road property. He was not allowed to contest my grandmother's will again, ever. I drove out to the house the afternoon after the hearing. I hadn't been staying there, hadn't been able to make myself go back while everything was unresolved, but I had been paying the utilities and the lawn service, and I had asked my neighbor Mrs. Patterson to keep an eye on it, which she had done with a thoroughness that I suspected involved some amount of binoculars. I sat on the back porch for a while and looked at the yard, at the garden beds my grandmother had maintained for 40 years, at the oak tree my grandfather had planted when my mother was born, at the view of the valley that had not changed in any way that I could see since I was 6 years old and eating peanut butter sandwiches on this same porch. My grandmother had known exactly what she was doing when she left me this house and not my brother. She had known that I would sit on this porch and feel the weight of it and take care of it the way she had taken care of it. She had known that my brother would have sold it within a year. She was right about all of it, as she had been right about most things. I thought about what Sandra had said during one of our calls, when I had mentioned feeling guilty about pursuing the criminal charges, about the fact that this was my brother and that he had a wife who was now facing her own legal consequences, and about what our mother was going to say. Sandra had let me finish, and then she said, very calmly, "He committed fraud. He tried to steal your house. Your guilt is a habit, not a verdict." I had written that down and put it on my refrigerator. My mother called me the night of the arrest and cried for 40 minutes. She said she didn't understand how it had gotten this far. She said I should have called her first, talked to the family first, handled it privately. She said my grandmother wouldn't have wanted this. I let her finish. I said, "Mom, he filed a fraudulent deed. He tried to take out a mortgage on my house using my identity. That's not a family dispute. That's a crime. I paused. And if Grandma had wanted me to let him get away with it, she would have left him the house. My mother was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I know. And then, more quietly, I know. She didn't fully understand it for a while after that, but she came around. People usually do, when the alternative is pretending that something wrong is acceptable because it's inconvenient to call it what it is. I changed my passwords, all of them. I changed my bank account numbers, updated my social security monitoring, put a fraud alert on my credit file. Sandra helped me file for enhanced deed monitoring with the county recorder, a service where any future filing against the property address triggers an immediate notification. I got new locks for every door and a new padlock for the gate, and I kept the key on my person at all times. Mrs. Patterson brought me a pie the week I moved back in, peach, from the tree in her yard. We sat on my back porch and she told me that she had watched my grandmother plant that garden and tend it for 35 years before her hips gave out, and that she had told my grandmother more than once that she had built something worth protecting. I asked her if my grandmother had said anything back. Mrs. Patterson smiled and said, she said she already knew that. She said that's why she was leaving it to you. I thought about that for a long time after she went home. I was still thinking about it when I went inside, locked the door behind me, and stood in the kitchen that smelled like old wood and something I had no word for except home. My brother had bet that I would be too shocked to act fast, too sentimental to go through with it, too eager to keep the peace, to let it go where it needed to go. He had known me my whole life, and he had still gotten me completely wrong. Maybe because the version of me he knew was the one who had always bent to keep things smooth, who had loaned him money I didn't ask back for, who had made excuses for him to people who deserved the truth. That version of me had been genuinely trying to be a good sister. But being a good sister was never the same thing as being a doormat. And somewhere between that parking garage and the recorder's office and the back porch of my grandmother's house, I had finally, completely understood the difference. I kept the house. I kept every piece of my grandmother's documentation. I kept the letters in the fireproof box. And that winter, on a Sunday afternoon when the oak tree had gone bare and the valley was covered in the first frost of the season, I finally sat down and read them. They were exactly what I had known they would be: careful, thorough, built on a foundation of knowing exactly what you have, what it's worth, and what you're willing to do to protect it. She had known I would understand.